The version of you that you miss may not be gone. It may be inaccessible, and those are two different realities. Chosen one. Some memories of yourself feel like memories of another person. You remember being quicker, more curious, more creative, maybe more intuitive. Then, life happened. Responsibility increased, noise increased, self-consciousness increased. You learned what was realistic, and slowly, you stopped asking where that earlier person went. You built an identity around the person who remained. That may have been the mistake. Some of what you call personality may only be repetition that lasted long enough to feel permanent. You may call yourself distracted, tired, indecisive, but a repeated state can become familiar without becoming true. Think about the moments when another version of you appears. You wake up and your mind feels clear. You know what needs to happen. You finish something you delayed for weeks. Then the fog returns, and you wonder why you cannot always be that person. Maybe an answer comes while walking or showering. Then you sit down to use it, and the answer feels farther away. Maybe people once called you bright, imaginative, or aware. Those memories matter because they point toward a version of you that still feels real. What if that person was never erased? What if access changed? What if you did not become less gifted, but learned to live from a narrower version of yourself? The identity you repeat most often is not always the identity that came first. Sometimes it is simply the identity that learned how to survive. If you believe the fog is you, you will try to fix your character. If you believe hesitation is you, you may shame yourself for lacking courage. But if these are states, not identity, the question changes. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" You begin asking, "What happened to my access?" That shift changes everything. Sometimes you know before anyone confirms it. An idea arrives whole. Then a simple decision can feel heavier than it should. Those two versions can feel like two different people. But what if one is your deeper capacity, and the other is the condition you learned under pressure? Your story may not be about becoming someone new. It may be about recognizing who keeps trying to return. If some part of this is touching a memory you thought you lost, write, "I remember." Not because a comment proves anything, because naming recognition makes it harder to dismiss what you already know. I remember the version of me that trusted a clear thought before fear surrounded it, and I am willing to ask where that person went. The first evidence of your true identity is not found in a dramatic past life story. It is found in recurrence, in qualities that reappear after long silence, in capacities that return when pressure falls away. So if you are the reincarnation of someone, who exactly is coming back? I will not give you a famous name. I will not hand you a flattering label. A part of you survived every adaptation and every season when you became smaller just to function. You have seen traces of that person many times. You may not have known how to read the evidence. The first clue is not in a past life. It is in the moment you first stopped trusting the life already inside you. Chosen one. The first trap is subtle. When you feel different from the people around you, you naturally search for a name that explains the difference. Empath, old soul, seer, healer, chosen one. Each label can feel like relief because it gives shape to something you have sensed for years. But a label can recognize a pattern without explaining its source. They keep searching for a more dramatic name, believing the perfect identity will make their life make sense. Yet the more labels they collect, the farther they move from the evidence already living inside them. Your real clue is not the title you can claim. It is the pattern that keeps returning. What comes naturally when fear is quiet? What quality appears when you stop performing? What ability returns during the rare moments? When your mind feels clear, your body feels settled, and you are not trying to impress anyone. Maybe you see connections others miss. Maybe you create solutions before you can explain how you found them. These are not proofs of a supernatural identity. They are traces of recurring capacity. This is the first breakthrough. Stop asking only, "Who am I supposed to call myself?" Start asking, "What part of me keeps trying to return?" The second question is harder to decorate, but much easier to test against your life. Take a moment and find 3 traces. One thing that came naturally when you were younger. One thing that disappeared under stress. One thing that still returns when you feel safe, focused, or deeply interested. Do not choose what sounds impressive. Choose what is true. Perhaps the first trace is curiosity. Perhaps the second is courage. Perhaps the third is creative connection. The ability to see how 2 unrelated things fit before anyone else sees it. Now notice what all 3 have in common. They do not require you to invent a new person. They point backward toward an existing pattern. Something in you survived every adaptation, even when the surface of your life changed. A flattering past life story cannot be the final answer. If I gave you a famous name, you might feel special for 5 minutes. But tomorrow you would still face the same distance between what you sense and what you can use. The useful question is different. What happened between the person who could access those capacities naturally and the person who now struggles to reach them? That question gives us somewhere to go. It turns identity from fantasy into investigation. And there is another layer I want you to hold. Over the past decades, researchers have studied something about the way the human mind coordinates its own capacities. The finding does not prove a spiritual label. It does something more useful. It gives us another way to think about why access can change, even when potential remains. I am going to return to that later. For now, hold one question. What if the reason you feel farther from your original clarity is not age, not laziness, and not a lack of spiritual worth? What if part of the answer lives in the condition through which your own abilities are being received and used? Do not answer yet. We are not ready for that reveal. First, we have to look at the person you became while trying to function in a world that rewarded adaptation. Because the next trap is even hard to see. It happens when survival works so well that you stop calling it survival. You call it personality. You call it maturity. You call it who you are. And that is just where the original self becomes hardest to recognize. Chosen one, adaptation rarely announces itself. It happens quietly. A correction here, a disappointment there, a moment when honesty costs too much, a moment when curiosity gets punished. Then another, and another. As a child, you may have moved before calculating every risk. You asked because questions were alive. Then the world gave feedback. Be practical, be careful, do not be too sensitive, do not want too much. None of those messages had to destroy you. They only had to repeat. Repetition teaches you what feels safe, and once safety becomes the priority, parts of you can become quieter without disappearing. This is how adaptation starts to look like identity. Curiosity becomes caution, courage becomes overthinking, imagination becomes realism. Years later, the person you remember feels far away. But familiar does not mean original. That sentence matters. The fact that fog returns often does not prove clarity was only a childhood accident. Notice what happens when pressure falls away. You take a long walk. Suddenly, thoughts connect again. Your curiosity returns. You feel more like yourself because something stopped interfering. That is a clue. The adapted self becomes strongest under pressure. It scans, it predicts, it manages, it protects. Those abilities may have helped you through difficult seasons, but a protector is not always the person who should lead your entire life. This does not mean childhood was perfect. It does not mean every instinct you had at 8 years old was wisdom. We are not trying to become immature again. We are separating capacity from conditioning. We are asking what was alive before fear became the editor. Take one moment now. Notice your shoulders, notice your jaw, notice your body as you think about an important decision. Do not change anything yet. Then remember one moment when you felt clear, present, and unforced. It might be ordinary. Maybe you were explaining an idea. Maybe you were solving a problem while others felt stuck. Maybe you were laughing before you monitored yourself. What changed in your body during that memory? Did your breathing soften? That matters, because identity is not only a story told with words. Sometimes your body recognizes a familiar way of being before your mind does. For this message, remember means more than recalling information. It means bringing scattered parts back into relationship. Not nostalgia, not pretending the past was sacred. Reunion. Now, look at your life. What did you learn to do to avoid rejection? What did you stop expressing to keep others comfortable? What did you call maturity when it may have been self-protection? The adapted self had a job. It helped you belong. It helped you avoid pain. But what protects you in one season can limit you in another if the strategy never changes. So hold this contrast. The original self asks, what is true? The adapted self asks, what is safe? The original self moves toward meaningful curiosity. The adapted self waits for certainty. Neither is evil, but only one should decide the direction of your life. And now a deeper question appears. If the original self is still present, why can you not access it whenever you choose? Why does clarity arrive in flashes, then disappear when you need it most? That question takes us beyond identity labels. It takes us into the gap between knowing and using what you know. And once you see that gap clearly, the mystery of your returning self becomes much more practical. Chosen one, knowing is not the same as being able to use what you know. You can understand the pattern and still repeat it. You can recognize the boundary and still avoid the conversation. You can feel the next step clearly, then watch that clarity disappear when the moment arrives. This is where many people become cruel to themselves. They say they need more discipline. They say their faith is weak. They decide they must not want the change badly enough. But those explanations can miss something important. Insight and access are not always the same thing. Think of a message arriving clearly, but the receiver is overloaded. The signal may be present, the meaning may be real, yet the system receiving it may be too tired, distracted, or conditioned to use it well. That gap between what you know and what your present state allows you to use has a name. I call it the receiver gap. It is the distance between insight and usable clarity. It explains why you can know exactly what needs to change in the morning, then abandon the decision by afternoon. It explains why an idea can feel alive during a quiet walk, then impossible when pressure returns. You may know that a relationship needs a boundary, but when the conversation begins, your mind searches for reasons to stay silent. You may know which project matters, but when you sit down, smaller tasks suddenly feel urgent. You may feel a calling clearly in prayer, then let ordinary noise erase its weight. That does not automatically mean the insight was false. It may mean the receiver changed. This distinction matters because it gives you a better question. Instead of asking why you keep failing yourself, ask what state you are in when access disappears. Maybe the difference is sleep. Maybe it is stress. Maybe it is fear of judgment. Maybe it is the pressure of being watched. Maybe it is a pattern so familiar that your mind returns to it before you notice. The point is not to diagnose yourself. The point is to stop turning every struggle into a verdict about identity. And this is where the spiritual veteran may resist. You may say that prayer matters, meditation matters, reflection matters. Yes, they can matter deeply, but practice and state do not have to compete. A meaningful message can still be harder to live from when the mind receiving it is scattered. Imagine one ordinary day with a smaller receiver gap. You wake up and know the first important thing to do. You begin before fear creates 10 alternatives. A difficult conversation comes, and your words remain available. An idea arrives, and you write it down before doubt edits it into silence. Nothing supernatural has to happen for that day to feel different. The change is simple. More of what you already know becomes usable. More of what you already carry becomes available at the moment it matters. Remember the research I asked you to hold earlier. I told you there was another way to think about why access can change even when potential remains. We are getting close to that answer now. But first, notice the deeper implication. If the receiver gap is real in your life, then perhaps the person you miss is not gone at all. Perhaps that person appears whenever the conditions allow more of you to come online. So the mystery is no longer only who you are. The mystery is why access changes. And once that question becomes clear, the next reveal stops being mystical language and becomes something you can actually examine. Chosen one. This is where the title begins to turn. You came here with a question about reincarnation. Maybe part of you expected a famous name, a prophet, an inventor, a mystic. But a flattering name would not solve the problem we uncovered. It would not explain the fog. It would not explain the hesitation. It would not explain why the person you remember appears in flashes, then disappears when pressure returns. So here is the deeper possibility. The person returning through your life may not be a stranger from another century. It may be the original version of you, the one that existed before adaptation became so familiar that you started calling it personality. That does not mean you should become a child again. It means some capacities may have been buried under years of self-monitoring, stress, caution, and repetition. Curiosity became guarded. Courage became conditional. Clear instinct became something you checked against everyone else before trusting. I call this the returning self. Not a fantasy identity, not a supernatural biography, a recurring pattern of qualities that keeps showing up whenever the pressure loosens and more of you becomes available. Look back at the evidence. There were moments when you were decisive without being reckless, moments when creativity moved before fear, moments when you knew what mattered and did not need 5 opinions to confirm it. If that capacity keeps returning, then your task changes. You do not need to invent a better person. You need to stop feeding every pattern that blocks access to the person already there. This is why becoming more is not always the answer. More information can become another hiding place. More labels can become another costume. More techniques can become another way to postpone the one question that matters. What keeps you from living from what you already know? That question brings us back to the receiver gap. Recognition can be powerful, but recognition alone does not guarantee movement. You can know that the adapted self is not the whole of you and still wake up tomorrow inside the same mental conditions. So now the open loop from earlier matters. I told you that researchers had studied something about how the human mind coordinates its own capacities. I waited, because information only becomes useful when you understand the problem it is trying to answer. You now understand the shape of that problem. You have seen adaptation and the gap between insight and usable clarity. You have seen that the person you miss may be harder to access, not absent. Here is the missing piece. Why does recognition still fail to create movement? Why can a true insight remain true and still change nothing? The answer may not live only in belief. It may also involve the condition of the mind that has to receive and act on what you know. That is why the research matters. Not because science can tell you who your soul is. It cannot. Not because a laboratory can prove a spiritual identity. It cannot. But research can give language to a practical part of an experience that spiritual language leaves vague. You are not being asked to become somebody else. You are being asked to examine what helps the original self become more available. The person coming back is you. The final question is, whether access to that person can be supported in a concrete way. That is where we go next. Chosen one. Let us put the mystery into plain language. You may have mistaken an adapted version of yourself for your permanent identity. You may have treated fog, hesitation, and scattered attention as character flaws. And you may have assumed that knowing your path should automatically make you able to live it. But knowing and accessing are different. The why is adaptation. The what is the receiver gap. The who is the original self that still appears whenever more of your capacity becomes available. Knowing who you are is clarity. Being able to live from that person is movement. Remember the research I asked you to hold. In 1981, Doctor Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discoveries about the functional specialization of the cerebral hemispheres. His work deepened understanding of how the two sides of the brain contribute differently to human experience. That research does not prove reincarnation. It does not prove a spiritual label, but it gives us a useful bridge into a practical question. What happens when the capacities of the brain are not working together as effectively as they could? Consider two stories shared in the material behind it. A woman from California described years of mental fog and emotional disconnection despite trying personal growth practices. After using the audio sequence, she described feeling clearer and more present. A man from Texas described carrying work and family responsibility, while his mind never felt fully available. After using the sequence, he reported greater clarity and said the fog no longer felt normal. Those are personal reports, not guarantees. Your experience may be different, but they point toward the same question we have been asking. What if reduced access is not the same as reduced potential? The team behind the resource is led by Dr. Daniel Barone, a neurologist in New York. They created an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence designed around what they call neural sync technology and whole brain activation. You use headphones, close your eyes, relax, and listen for 8 minutes. They call it the Genius Switch. The Genius Switch is presented as a tool intended to support coordination between the two hemispheres. It is not positioned as a meditation app, and it is not meant to replace prayer, reflection, or any spiritual practice. The routine is simple: 8 minutes a day, headphones, eyes closed. If you miss a day, you simply return. The Genius Switch is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who is finished treating reduced access as a permanent identity. It is for the person who has done inner work, felt genuine insight, and still senses a gap between what they know and what they can consistently use. The product material presents a $500 value anchor. The listed price is $49, while the current page price is $39. It also includes 4 bonuses. The bonuses include a guided visualization, a smart grocery shopping guide, a classic manifestation book, and a 5 habits infographic. The purchase includes lifetime access and a money-back guarantee according to the product material. You can review the details and decide whether it fits you. The material also says the $39 price may increase. That is not a reason to force a decision. It is simply part of the offer as presented. Similar names may appear elsewhere, but the product material says the official version is distributed only through its direct website. If you choose to look at it, use the link in the description or pinned comment. If your spirit resonates with what has been described, that is where the resource is available. And remember what this tool is not. It is not your identity. It is not proof that you are chosen. It is not a substitute for courage, reflection, or action. It is one possible support for the receiver. The deeper current remains the same. You are not trying to manufacture a new self. You are learning how to stop mistaking reduced access for the whole of who you are. Chosen one, there is one thing I want to make clear before we go deeper. A tool cannot become your identity. A resource cannot make you worthy. A technique cannot decide who you are, and nothing outside you should replace reflection, courage, faith, or the choices only you can make. That matters because trust is more important than excitement. You may be thinking that this entire message was leading toward a product, but the central truth does not depend on whether you buy anything. You can use what you have already learned today without spending a single dollar. Start here. Stop calling every repeated struggle your personality. Stop saying I am scattered when what you mean is I feel scattered today. Stop saying I am weak when what you mean is I am afraid in this moment. Language matters because identity follows repetition more easily than most people realize. The resource described earlier is only one possible support. It does not choose, pray, speak, or act for you. Those actions still belong to you. Imagine tomorrow morning with a little less distance between insight and action. You wake up and know the first important thing to do. You begin before fear creates 10 alternatives. You do not need a perfect mood. You simply move while the signal is still clear. Then imagine the conversation you have delayed. You know the boundary. This time your words remain available. You speak without attacking. You listen without disappearing. The victory is staying present enough to act from what you already knew. Now imagine the project that has been sitting unfinished. You open it. You do not wait for inspiration to become dramatic. You take one clear step, then another. By evening, you have evidence that the returning self is not an idea. It is a pattern of action. This is the future I want you to see. Not instant wealth, not a perfect life, something more grounded. More of your own clarity becomes available when decisions matter, and you stop abandoning yourself when action begins. If the resource mentioned earlier stirred genuine curiosity in you, that door is still open in the description and pinned comment. You can read the details for yourself and decide calmly. There is no need to turn clarity into pressure, because the deeper work continues with or without a tool. You still have to notice adaptation. You still have to separate what is happening from who you are. You still have to act differently when the old pattern asks for control. And this is where many people discover something surprising. The returning self does not arrive with thunder. It arrives in smaller choices. A cleaner no, a faster yes, a finished page. A difficult truth spoken gently. 10 minutes of focused work instead of another hour of avoidance. Do not underestimate those moments. They are evidence. Every time you act from clarity before fear rewrites the instruction, you strengthen the relationship with the person you thought you had lost. So the question is no longer whether a tool can save you. It cannot. The question is whether you are willing to stop abandoning the version of you that appears when the noise becomes quiet. In the next step, we are going to turn this into something practical, not another label, not another theory. A simple way to recognize the adapted self, separate from it, and choose one action from the person underneath it. Because remembering is not complete until it changes the way you move. Chosen one. Stop asking only who you used to be. That question can become another place to hide. The more useful question is this: what part of you is asking to live again, here, in the life you have now? You do not need proof that you were someone famous. You do not need a supernatural biography. You need honesty to recognize what keeps returning, and courage to stop calling it an accident. This is where reincarnation changes meaning. Not becoming another being, returning to capacities you mistook for lost. Close your eyes for a moment if it is safe to do so. Let your breathing stay natural. Do not force relaxation. Picture the version of you who lives today, carrying the responsibilities, habits, and expectations gathered over the years. Now picture an earlier version of you standing nearby. Not a perfect child, not an idealized memory, just a version of you before every decision had to pass through fear, approval, and self-monitoring. Notice what quality appears first: curiosity, courage, playfulness, focus, honesty, creativity. Do not choose the most impressive answer. Notice the one that feels familiar. Now ask one question: which qualities never truly disappeared? You may have hidden them, you may have stopped trusting them, but absence from daily life is not always proof of permanent loss. Place one hand over your chest if that feels comfortable. Take one steady breath. Let the body register the difference between saying, "I need to become someone else," and saying, "I am learning to return to what is already mine." That is the reframe. You are not choosing between the current self and a mythical, earlier self. You are deciding which qualities deserve leadership now. Use 3 returns when the old pattern appears. First, notice. Name what is happening without turning it into identity. Say, "I am experiencing hesitation," not "I am a hesitant person." Second, separate. Ask whether the reaction belongs to your values or to an adaptation that once kept you safe. Do not fight the adaptation. Notice what it tried to protect, then decide whether its job is still needed. Third, ACT. Choose one small behavior that matches the original quality you want to restore. If the quality is courage, send the message. If it is creativity, open the document. If it is honesty, say the sentence you have edited for 3 weeks. The action should be small enough to complete within 1 day. A vague declaration gives fear room to negotiate. A specific action gives your returning self somewhere to land. Do not measure success by how spiritual you feel afterward. Measure it by evidence. Did you notice the pattern? Did you separate it from identity? Did you act once from the quality you wanted to reclaim? That is how remembering becomes practical. You allow an original capacity to participate in the present. And when you repeat that process, something shifts. The adapted self stops being an enemy. It becomes an old strategy you can recognize. The returning self stops being a mystery. It becomes a way of choosing. You have spent enough time asking who you might have been. The final question is simpler. Who are you willing to be now that you can see the difference? Chosen one, we can close the circle now. You came here with a question about true identity. You came with the possibility that you might be the reincarnation of someone extraordinary. But the answer we followed was closer than that. You were looking backward for a stranger when the strongest evidence was already inside your own life. The child who noticed more. The adult who still has flashes of unusual clarity. The part of you that returns when pressure falls away. The voice that knows before fear begins negotiating. Those pieces were never asking you to become somebody else. They were asking you to remember. Not everything from your past should return. Some versions of you needed to end. Some beliefs protected you once and would limit you now. Some habits belong to seasons you have already survived. But beneath those layers, certain capacities kept appearing. Curiosity, discernment, creativity, courage, presence. They survived because they were never costumes. This is why the adapted self was never your enemy. It helped you survive what you did not yet know how to face. But survival is not required to become your permanent identity. The receiver gap showed you something else. You can possess insight and still struggle to use it. That struggle does not automatically define your worth. It tells you to look at the conditions surrounding access, then make practical changes where you can, and the returning self gave the whole message a name. The person coming back is you, not a prophet from another century, not a billionaire whose destiny you inherited, not a genius whose biography makes you feel special. You, the version of you that learned, created, noticed, trusted, and moved before every signal had to fight through layers of fear. So when this message ends, do not chase another label. Choose one piece of evidence, one boundary, one page, one conversation, one decision. Let your next action become proof that remembering can enter the body and become movement. Say this slowly if it feels true. I am not the adaptation I learned to survive through. I am still here beneath it. I recognize what is mine. I release what became familiar but was never original. I return with clarity. I return with courage. I return as myself. If you want to seal that decision, write, I am returning. Let those words mean one thing. I will stop confusing what happened to me with who I am. There is nothing more you need to prove tonight. There is only something to practice tomorrow. You were never required to become a stranger. You were asked to remember. And the person coming back is you.